have not watched the first part of this video, it will be linked down below. Go check it out. These stories are short stories, and they are more geared for children, so they are not too crazy, but some of them are a little bit freaky, so hopefully anyone can enjoy these stories. Many of you grew up reading these books, so I'm just so excited to be able to bring them back for you. A little side note, I do have a little candle right in front of me, so if you see the light kind of flicker, it's because of that. I wanted to do my best to make it seem like we're all sitting around maybe a bonfire or around the fireplace at home reading scary stories. Okay, as you can see, I divided some of our stories that way. It's a little bit easier for me to kind of identify where they're at, because there's tons of stories in here, and of course I'm not reading every single one of them. I believe I am reading 3, 4, 5, 6 stories, 6 short stories, and many of them are 1 to 2 pages, so that's why I decided to do that many. If you like these kind of videos, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I try to post videos every single week. But anyways, you are going to love this video if you're into scary stories, and because of course Halloween is around the corner. So let's go ahead and begin with the first story. So this is a little title page for the upcoming stories that are in here, and I kind of wanted to read this for you before we go into our very first story, okay? It says, they eat your eyes, they eat your nose. There are scary stories about all kinds of things. The ones told here are about a grave, a witch, a man who liked to swim, a hunting trip, and a market basket. There's also one about worms eating a corpse. Your corpse. First story. The girl who stood on a grave. Some boys and girls were at a party one night. There was a graveyard down the street, and they were talking about how scary it was. Don't ever stand on a grave after dark, one of the boys said. The person inside will grab you. He'll pull you under. That's not true, one of the girls said. It's just a superstition. I'll give you $1 if you stand on a grave, said the boy. A grave doesn't scare me, said the girl. I'll do it right now. The boy handed her a knife. Stick this knife in one of the graves, he said. Then we'll know you were there. The graveyard was filled with shadows and was as quiet as death. There's nothing to be scared of, the girl told herself. But she was scared anyways. She picked out a grave and stood on it. Then quickly she bent over and plunged the knife into the soil. And she started to leave, but she couldn't get away. Something was holding her back. She tried a second time to leave, but she couldn't move. She was filled with terror. Something has gotten me, she screamed, and she fell to the ground. When she didn't come back, the others went to look for her. They found her body sprawled across the grave without realizing inspiration for the story. A new horse. Two farmhands shared a room. One slept at the back of the room. The other slept near the door. After a while, the one who slept near the door began to feel very tired early in the day. His friend asked what was wrong. An awful thing happens to me every night, he said. A witch turns me into a horse and rides me all over the countryside. I'll sleep in your bed tonight, his friend said. We'll see what happens to me. About midnight, an old woman who lived nearby came into the room. She mumbled some strange words over the farmhand, and he found he couldn't move. Then she slipped a bridle on him, and he turned into a horse. The next thing he knew, she was riding him across the fields at breakneck speed, beating him to make him go even faster. Soon they came to a house where a party was going on. There was a lot of music and dancing. They were having a big time inside. She hinged him to a fence and went in. While she was gone, the farmhand rubbed against the fence until the bridle came off, and he turned back into a human being. Then he went into the house and found the witch. He spoke those strange words over her, and with the bridle, he turned her into a horse. Then he rode her to a blacksmith and had her fitted with horseshoes. After that, he rode her to the farm where she lived. I have a pretty good filly here, she told her husband, but I need a stronger horse. Would you like to trade? The old man looked her over and he said he would do it. So they picked out another horse, and the farmhand rode away. Her husband led his new horse to the barn. He took off the bridle and went to hang it up. But when he came back, the new horse was gone. Instead, there stood his wife with horseshoes nailed to their hands and feet. This is her, and if you look very carefully, you can see she's wearing a heel. Oh my gosh, this image is so disturbing. The next story is the last story from this chapter, okay? This one is called May I Carry Your Basket? May I carry your basket, 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 basket. Sam Lewis spent the evening playing chess at his friend's house. It was about midnight when they finished their game, and he started to go home. Outside it was icy cold and as quiet as a grave. As he came around and turned into the road, he was surprised to see a woman standing ahead of him. She was carrying a basket covered with a white cloth. When he caught up to her, he looked to see who it was, but she was in a bundled up against the cold, and it was kind of hard to see her face. Good evening, Sam said. What brings you out so late? But she didn't answer. Then he said, May I carry your basket? May I carry your basket? She handed it to him. From under the cloth, a small voice said, That's very nice of you. And that was followed by wild laughter. Sorry guys if you guys see the lighting change. I am recording this during the day. Even though it is very cloudy and raining, there is moments where the sun comes out, so I do apologize if satin evening gown. A young man invited a young woman to a formal dance, but she was very poor and he could not afford to buy the evening gown she needed for such an occasion. Maybe you can rent a dress, her mother said. So she went to a pawn shop not too far from where they lived. There she found a white satin evening gown in her size. She looked lovely in it, and she was able to rent it for very little. When she arrived at the dance with a friend, she was so attractive everyone wanted to meet her. She danced again and again and was having a wonderful time. But then she began to feel dizzy and faint, and she asked her friend to take her home. I think I have danced too much, she told him. When she got home, she lay down on her bed. The next morning, her mother found out that her daughter had died. The doctor did not understand what had caused her death, so she had the coroner perform an autopsy. The coroner found out that she had been poisoned by embalming fluid. It had stopped her blood from flowing. There were traces of that fluid on her dress. He decided it had entered her skin when she was sweating while she was dancing. The pawnbroker said that he had bought the dress from an undertaker's helper. It had been used in a funeral for another young woman, and the helper had stolen it just before she was buried. Oh my god. Wow. Like, look at this dress. Imagine wearing a dress and it kills you. The Babysitter. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. Everybody was sitting on the couch in front of the TV. There were Richard, Brian, Jenny, and Doreen, the babysitter. The telephone rang. Maybe it's your mother, said Doreen. She picked up the phone. Before she could say a word, a man laughed hysterically and hung up. Who was it? Asked Richard. Some nut, said Doreen. What did I miss? At 9:30, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered. It was a man who had called before. I'll be there soon, he said, and he laughed and hung up. Who was it? The children asked. Some crazy person, she said. About 10 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Jenny got to it first. Hello, she said. It was the same man. 1 more hour, he said. He laughed and hung up. What did he mean? Asked Jenny. Don't worry, said Doreen. It's somebody fooling around. I'm scared, said Jenny. About 10:30, the telephone rang 1 more time. When Doreen picked up, the man said, Pretty soon now. And he laughed. Why As Robert was checking his straps, he got the feeling that something was wrong at home. He hurried back as fast as he could, but when he got there, he found that Sam was missing. He searched the house in the woods nearby, but Sam was nowhere to be seen. He called, and the dog did not answer. For days, Robert looked for Sam, but he could not find any trace of him. Finally, he gave up and went back to his work, but one morning he heard something moving in the attic. He picked up his gun. Then he thought, I better be quiet about this. So he took off his boots, and in his bare feet, he began to climb the attic stairs. He slowly took one step, then another, until at last he reached the attic door. He stood outside listening, but he didn't hear a thing. Then he opened the door, and you might be thinking, why did he yell? Well, you screamed too if you stepped on a nail in your bare feet. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that story was kinda silly. I thought the dog was gonna be there. Alright everyone, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm having a lot of fun recording all of these Halloween themed videos. So if there's anything that you would like to see before Halloween, please comment down below, or you can send me a direct message on my Instagram at Sanchez with 3 C's, or on ASMR with Yachty. I have linked everything down below, as well as the first part of this series